Intercepted in the mailroom of Stragview Prison, March 16th, 2009. Hey Mary, it's me, Peter. I really hope this gets to you. They say the mailroom checks all the outgoing mail, but I hope this letter slips through somehow. I've really messed up this time, Mary. Worse than all the other times. I'm sitting in a 10 by 12 concrete box, surrounded by other noisy inmates in similar cells, and I've never felt safer in my life. After what happened yesterday, it's a wonder I can feel anything at all. I had to wait a whole day to write this letter to you because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I'm freaking out, knowing these things are just outside the fences, knowing they could come in at any time and get me. I'm rambling. You probably feel pretty lost. Let me start at the beginning. It's been a long 3 years behind the fence. I've been doing okay, trying to make my time matter, but it's hard not to think about what you're missing on the outside. I've been palling around with some of the other guys who were in here for a hell of a lot worse than a B&E, guys that had figured out a way to escape. One of them, Marcus Reese, is actually a pretty big-time writer. He says he's written enough novels about crime, punishment, and life in prison that escaping one should be easy. Clyde, he's our muscle, figured out that we could make it over the fence if we had enough clothes from the laundry room. Booker, who works in the laundry, supplied us with the clothes so that we could make our escape. We had paid off the white nationalists to start trouble in the rec yard. It always takes a long time to set these things up in the movies, but you'd be surprised how quickly you can get it all together. Booker got our laundry bags stuffed with extra clothes. Clyde and I traded the white nationals a lot of our personal items for their help. Reese found some books in the library to help us make our escape over the fence and get into the woods. Stragview's an old prison with a checkered past, and it wasn't hard to find some books on it and information online in the resource center. Within 2 weeks, the escape went from something we had been joking about to a full-fledged plan that we were ready to enact. It was cold and foggy when we made our break. Given the weather, no one thought it was weird when we wore our coats and boots on the rec yard. We stuffed our blankets under the coats, those coarse wool things they give us to sleep under, and packed whatever food we had left in our pockets. Stragview is surrounded by woods, and we knew that we'd be in for a long run if we were going to make it to the perimeter. We each had enough supplies to make it through the night, and we were confident that we could make it out when we entered the yard. Reese had been talking to the guys in the maintenance crew. They had told him about a section of fence where the power wasn't working after a lightning strike last month. It was at a junction near the rec fence, and we knew that that would be our climbing point. The ruckus started after 3 p.m. Some of the WN guys started pretending to fight, and pretty soon everyone was getting in on the action. When the guards went to break it up, we made our move for the fence. We threw the blankets over the razor wire and were over the first section of fence and halfway over the second before anyone noticed. By the time they were organizing to do something about it, we were on the other side and making for the woods. We'd expected our escape to take time, but the whole process took about 7 minutes. The woods were about 30 feet of open grassland from the fence. We booked it, hearing the guards shouting behind us. When a shotgun went off, we all heard Booker fall down screaming. I looked back, seeing him curled up in the grass, and put on an extra burst of speed as our pursuers gained on us. They stopped to secure Booker, though, and that was how we made it to the woods and found safety. We all ran in, not stopping at the trees that encircled us, but none of us could have expected what happened next. No one came after us. We heard the dogs, and we could see the guards backing away from the woods, but no one seemed to want to come in beyond the trees and get us. "Hey, these pussies don't want to come in after us. Guess they're afraid of getting lost in the woods," Clyde said. That should have tipped us off right away. We started to move into the woods, the sun setting behind as we went. The forest seemed to be mostly pines, their needles crunching underfoot as we made our way deeper into the gloom. I didn't register at first, but the deeper we went, the more I noticed the silence. Clyde was oblivious. The closest he'd ever come to a forest was a park somewhere in the inner city, but I could tell that Marcus was troubled by the silence as well. Forests aren't loud, but they usually have some noise. There's always the sound of birds or squirrels or the drone of insects or anything that reminds you that you're in an active ecosystem. We'd been walking for about 3 hours when I realized something else. We hadn't passed a stream or a river or any kind of water source. I had 2 bottles of water in my coat pocket, and I knew that Marcus did too. Clyde had drunk one of them not long after getting started, and if there was no water out here, we could be in for some real trouble. The sun was setting really low now, and I wondered why we hadn't hit the road yet. 3 hours was a lot of walking. We should have hit something by now. A road, a trail, an old trailer, something. And why hadn't we seen any helicopters yet? We had heard no pursuing dogs and heard no air searches being conducted for 3 missing inmates. What the hell were they doing back there? As the sun started to creep towards the horizon, that's when I first heard the noises. We'd been crunching along on the pine needles all day, so maybe they had been following us all along. I didn't think they had. I think it had only started once the sun got low. As we moved, I began to hear something heavy coming down on the pine needles. It sounded like a bear or maybe a big cat, but whenever I'd turn around to look, I didn't see anything. The others certainly didn't notice. They had started to argue. "We need to stop for the night," Clyde was saying. He had started to slow down a lot in the last hour and was clearly getting tired. You don't really do as much walking in prison as you'd think, and none of us were really prepared for a 3-hour hike through the woods. Marcus wouldn't hear of it, though. "I need to get out of these woods. I will walk until I fall down if that's what it takes, but I'm not stopping until I get out." Clyde scoffed. "You keep going like that and you're going to end up dead. We need to stop for the night." "Do whatever you want. I'm not stopping," Marcus said. Clyde started gathering sticks for a fire, clearing a place for us to sit, while Marcus just kept walking. I kind of wanted to go with him. I kind of felt like going with him might be the best idea, but I was tired and really just wanted to stop for the night. I watched Marcus disappear into the dwindling light and felt sure that I'd never see him again. Clyde threw a pine cone at me then and told me to help out. The next time I looked up, Marcus was gone. By 7:30, it was dark. By 9 o'clock, you couldn't have seen your hand in front of your face. Clyde and I had managed to get a small fire going, and we ate our chips and granola bars sullenly. We shivered in our canvas coats, the garments not providing a lot of warmth, and our blue prison uniforms offering a lot less. The fire was a weak thing, but if they decided to send out choppers, it would be harder for them to see our light if it was low. Clyde had said as much too, but I think it was mostly to make up for the weak little fire. The pine needles didn't burn very well, and most of the wood was rotten and full of bugs. We had discovered this when we'd tried to pull a log over to sit on. It had fallen apart in our hands, wet wood spilling insects all down our arms. Clyde had shaken his arms and slapped at his sleeves, and then moved away from the squirming remains as they writhed on a bed of pine needles. "How was it so wet?" Clyde asked. "I don't remember it raining recently." As we sat in the deepening darkness, I could feel the wet sinking into my pants, too. Had it been this wet earlier? I put a hand to the ground and felt something sticky come in contact with my palms. I pulled it up to my eyes, squinting hard at the thick, dark mulch that clung to it. I shook my hand vigorously a moment later. Whatever was there, it had seemed to move. I came off the ground, swiping at the bottom of my pants and looking around in the scant firelight. I could just imagine a swarm of insects or snakes moving around me, but the needle-strewn ground looked just as solid as it ever had. Clyde sprang awake, looking around before settling his eyes back on me. What's going on?" he said a little huffily. "Nothing, I guess. I thought I felt something on me," I said lamely. He settled back, but he kept peeking at me like he didn't exactly trust me. I curled up on the ground and tried to ignore the moisture that sank into my clothes. I was sure I could feel something moving under me, but I tried to get some sleep. Tomorrow we would find our way out of these woods and be free again. I had no illusions of a lengthy freedom, but I wanted to see all of you so badly that I didn't care how long it lasted. As I tried to sleep, though, I heard the crunching again. We had been making too much noise for me to be sure, but I didn't think I had heard it since Clyde and I had stopped for the night. Earlier it had sounded big, but now it sounded huge. Whatever was attached to that foot sounded like it was big enough to gobble us up in one bite. It crunched again, stalking in with low deliberacy as it got closer and closer to our little campfire. I lay as still as I could, hoping I wouldn't be noticed, as the thing dropped its heavy foot onto the blanket of pine needles. When it passed me, I had to stifle a sigh of relief. I glanced up, peeking through my lids to see the hulking thing that stood framed in the meager campfire. It was black, the guttering fire showing me a long, sleek body that looked more insect-like than feline. Its feet ended in killer claws that sank into the needles as it strode towards the fire. Its head was turned away from me, but I could hear it sniffing, filling its nostrils with a constant scent, and thought for one wild moment that it might be blind. It lowered its head to the campfire and sniffed at it, breath agitating it as it smelled the alien aroma. When Clyde began to scream, I had to stifle my own scream as the sound cut through the eerie silence. The creature whipped its head towards him. Clyde had been closer to the fire than I was, and he must have awoken to find the huge creature skulking near him. I heard him backpedal through the pine needles, tearing up the earth as he frantically tried to get away. That was when the big beast loosed the most unearthly sound I had ever heard. It was high and yowly, like a small animal caught in something. It stomped out the meager fire as it lunged for him, burying him under its bulk. His scream was muffled as the beast ripped into him, and at that moment, I knew that I was next if I didn't do something pretty damn quick. I lunged up, needles flying as I threw them up behind me, and ran into the dark woods. I was all but blind, the mood providing very little in the way of light. I bumped into trees and felt their surfaces try to catch hold of me. The ground itself seemed to try to drag my boots into it, and I felt the panic racing through me as I ran like my life depended on it. I didn't know where I was going or what I would find when I got there, but I knew it had to be better than this. After a few minutes, I heard something big behind me, churning up the ground as it gave chase. Trees seemed to whip out at me in that soupy darkness, and I juked around them without giving it any real thought. I remember when I was 7, we had watched Snow White on an old VHS player. I remember how that nightmare forest had terrified you almost as much as it had Snow White, and realized that that's where I was now. I was running through a nightmare, and my only hope was to wake up. I don't know how long I ran. At some point I could hear the massive beast chasing me through the woods. At another, it sounded like a whole pack of them were coming after me. I heard the trees break and the limbs snap as they flung themselves after me with wild abandon. Suddenly I felt something sharp rip across my back, but my fear was so palpable that I barely felt it. If I survived, there would be time to assess my wounds. Now, there was only running. I ran for what felt like hours. My legs burned and my chest heaved, but I could still hear the pack behind me. They were close. I wasn't sure how I had outrun them for so long when my foot hit a hole and sent me sprawling. I rolled through the raking fingers of trees, and when I came to rest, I was sure I was dead. The pack would be on me, and I'd be torn to shreds. I hadn't seen what had happened to Clyde, and that had been a mercy. The unknown was much less scary than what I anticipated. When the blow didn't come, I looked back through my fingers to see that I was on the edge of the woods. I had come to rest in an open area, the night sky strewn out before me. I was aware of sounds of insects and night birds as they went about their evening, and it sounded marvelous after hours in the silent woods. I looked back at the woods, and I could see a small pack of eyeless faces, their heads smooth and bullet-shaped, their gnashing teeth looking too big for their sleek mouths. They slunk back into the woods, not daring to come out of their sanctuary, it seemed. My breathing was still heavy, but I flopped back onto the grass and laughed despite my terror. I had survived. I was free of the hellscape forest. When the spotlights from Stragview found me, I was almost relieved. I was cuffed and dragged inside the gate. I didn't resist. Why would I? I had seen what lay beyond the fences, and I was in no hurry to get back to it. They took me to medical, cleaned and bandaged my wounds, and took me right to confinement as they dropped an escape charge on me. As I was brought in, the other inmates tried to talk to me, tried to get my attention, but I was as silent as the grave. I lay on my mat and tried to sleep, knowing that my pursuers' eyeless faces would never leave me. I wasn't there long, though, before something worse came to find me. About an hour into my confinement stay, 2 officers came to escort me to the disciplinary room where they held DR court. "Warden wants to see you," they said. I accepted my cuffs and went meekly enough. Even at 1 o'clock in the morning, the warden looked resplendent in his pinstripe suit and little gold glasses. His salt and pepper hair was in the same crew cut he always wore it in, and the edges looked like he had cut them with a ruler. As he leaned over the desk, I could tell that he was more amused than angry. We see the warden from time to time, usually only during important inspections. To most inmates, he's almost a mythical figure. Like a shark, he only comes around when there's blood in the water. "Did you enjoy your little hike?" he asked. The lights from the fluorescents glittered off the lenses of his glasses, and for a moment his eyes looked as smooth as that creature's face. "I could give you an extra 5 years for escaping, you know. You've only got 2 more years, and I can tell that you're desperate to get back to your family. Why else would you run, after all? I sat, saying nothing. He fixed me with a hard look. We have one of them in here, you know. My eyes snapped to his. Over in Quad 2. A little accident a few years ago. He's still in there, though, and he's ravenous. I could see one of the officers shudder, an older guy who looked like retirement should have come a few years ago. The doors are sealed, but I'm sure we could arrange a meeting if you'd really like to see him. I shivered, not even wanting to know that one of those things was in the fence. What do you want? I asked, ready for this to be over and me to be back behind the door. We already have inmate Booker back in custody. Now we have you as well. Inmate Reese and inmate Dorn are still at large, however. I want to know where they are. For that, I won't charge you with escape. Refuse, and I'll deny we ever found you. The implications were clear. There would be no evidence of me to find. He would make sure of that. Clyde's dead. Inmate Dorn, I mean. Your creatures killed him out in the woods. I don't know what happened to Reese. He left before nightfall and just kept walking. I'd assume that he's probably dead, too. That seemed to appease the warden, and he nodded at the guards. Take him back to his cell. He's under investigation for the next 30 days, or until medical says his back is healed. If he gives you any fuss, you know where to put him, he said, fixing me with a hard stare. I'm writing this letter to you in the hopes that maybe you'll read it. It's not right what they've got in here. It's not okay to let these things loose on the world. People should know about what lurks in the woods around Stragview. As I sit here in my cell, I can almost feel their eyeless faces looking at me. I doubt I'll ever forget them.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. If you haven't already, I always suggest hit that subscribe button. Maybe go ahead and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the great stories that we do here. I've got a link below to my latest book if you'd like to pick up your own copy. Follow the link below down to Amazon, and if you'd prefer a signed one, get up with me. I'm sure we can work something out. If you'd like to support the show in a more monetary way, might I suggest heading on down to Patreon. We have several tiers. I'm sure you'll find something that'll suit you. I always recommend my $10 tier, which is my Ghostly Reader tier. You get a signed copy of my book on your doorstep anytime I write one, which is, on average, about twice a year. Speaking of my awesome patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor, and thanks to Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Jennifer Damron, and Tyler Parker for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.